Well, hello everyone, and welcome again to Painless Universal Conversation with myself and Welsh. Today's conversation is something that you must listen to. From addiction pain to graduation. Imagine that. My guest today, her story will really touch and inspire you. She was born in the United States. Her mother suffered and dealt with drugs and for mental illness. Ginny Burton had a father who was also behind bars for strings of armed robbery. Her mother repeatedly introduced her to cannabis from the age of 6. At 14, she was smoking cocaine. She attempted suicide 3 years later after being raped by a man who bought her drugs from her mother. She went on to steal cars at gunpoint. She's done so much negative, all to get money to pay for her addiction. She's been in and out of jail so many times. She went as far as racking 17 serious convictions and was sent to jail 3 times, according to Yahoo News. But prison always gave her a chance to sober up and get herself ready so she comes out to go back in again. But then finally she gets the wake-up call to make a change to her life. Ginny decided to change things. She's been living this life for most of her life, almost 30 years. But one day, she decides to change things around. Meet my amazing guest, Ginny, as she shares her inspiring story of addiction pain to graduation. Well, hello everyone, and welcome again to Painless Universal, a conversation with myself and Welsh. As I said into my introduction, this conversation is one that will truly inspire you. Have you been through any kind of pain and you've tried to make your way back into normality of life? Addiction pain is our conversation today. And our guest, Ginny, will be telling you about her own journey, how she's turned from addiction, of different kinds of things, which I will not be talking about now because I want her to share her story, and finding your joy, finding your recovery along the way. Never easy, but we'll find out how she's doing. How are you, Ginny, today?
I'm doing well, Anne. Thank you so much for asking. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm really delighted to have you on board today because, anyone who reads your story, it was all over the papers here in the United Kingdom. And I hope people who have listened would actually see some of your story because it was in the Mirror, big papers out here. And I read that story of yours and I thought, wow, how did someone go through all of that and still find it in them to remain sane, to be back? Look at you. No one would ever believe that you've been through what you've gone through at all. But before we get started, who are you?
Yeah, gosh, that's such a big question. It's like I feel like that is one of the hardest questions to ever answer, right? So it's like, am I what I do? Am I my name? I think I'm just a person that's been faced with challenges. And unfortunately was unable to take any easy way out. And after decades of trying to not experience feelings and challenges, I've had no choice but to face my demons essentially and my fears and push forward. And so who I am is somebody that it has an opportunity to take their past mess and turn it into a message and try to change things for other people in our world.
That's amazing. I love that. It's nice. I love, the way you described yourself is really good. You talk about your background growing up, and you when you talk about it, you talk about your mother. Because I want to start from the very beginning. Your own mother started by taking drugs and she had a mental illness. Do you remember those days growing up as a child?
Oh, very much so. A lot of my childhood, it's been marked in my brain like indelible ink. And And I don't know that my mother was ever aware that there was any sort of mental illness, but as I've grown and aged and become more familiar with things in our world, I recognize that she definitely had some environmental mental illnesses. Maybe not organic like schizophrenia or anything, but because of consistent exposure to certain kind of traumas and things like that, you almost can't walk away with some mental health effects that really impact the people's lives around you. And so I have diagnosed my mom with mental illness. Otherwise, I don't think that she would have treated her children the way that she did. But I remember those days very well. And for a long time, I was very upset and angry and felt like those things happened to me. But today I have a really different perspective, and I believe that they happened for me because they just happened. It wasn't an intentional thing that she was out to get me. It's just that was her skill set. But what it's allowed me to do, it's allowed me to become strong in ways that my life probably wouldn't have been strengthened. And it has really compelled me to try to help to create passageways out of these kind of circumstances for other people, because the way that I grew up has had such a tremendous impact on my life that it's taken me decades to get out of it. But at the same time, because of my own personal relationship with myself, I've been able to essentially take notes and look at the things I did inefficiently and try to create a system to kind of streamline people out of those experiences, not without having to do hard work, but with just knowing that there is a way out, that you don't have to exist in your misery.
That's amazing though. And because your mother was not just the only problem, normally in household, we always say there's a comfort person I could go to and turn to. But in your household, there was just none of that. Because your mother had this problem she had to deal with. And then your father was involved in a number of armed robbery cases. How did that impact your life?
Yeah, I spent a really long time feeling like I had been abandoned on every level. And I also was really angry at whatever God was, because I don't think it matters who you are, where you come from, where you were raised. There's always this sort of idea or this whispering about this higher power, this deity called God that is somehow magical. And I wasn't really sure why this person or this thing, this experience, this energy had skipped my house. And so I felt really alone and I felt really trapped for a very long time.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Um, from the age of 6, I was reading your story, and you said your drug dealing mother will give you marijuana. And by 14, you were already smoking crack cocaine. And I can't imagine the horror that you were such a small child, you were already smoking cocaine, and especially the impact it has on the brain. Can you remember when you were taking this? How did you feel? Because I have a chronic illness myself, and just when I have to go through and take morphine, sometimes I know that wipes me out, and it sometimes wipes me out. I always tell the doctor, the cure is worse than the pain sometimes because of the aftermath effect. What did this do to you from the age of 6 to 14 when you're really into these kind of drugs?
Well, when I initially chose to do drugs, I was more focused on acceptance and love than I was trying to get high. I didn't want to do it. I knew my dad went to prison for using drugs. I didn't really understand the concept of what marijuana was as opposed to other drugs. And my mom had created this plan with my brothers and I to smoke with us. I was terrified. All I was able to do really was reflect on the experience that I had when I watched my dad get arrested and know that that was the result of drugs. And so, initially it was just about acceptance. And it continued on in that way for a long period of time. Um, my mom ended up having party houses, and I was able to then smoke weed with folks, and it made me feel like I was a little more grown up. So by the time I was 14 years old, I thought I was an adult. I thought I could make my own decisions. I thought that I was filled with the knowledge that I needed in order to navigate life. And so for me, it was a natural progression to move on to smoking crack cocaine. And once I tried crack cocaine, that's a drug that is I don't know. I don't really know how to describe it. It is, especially if you have a life that's filled with trauma. Um, and I won't say that this happens for everybody, but for me, what happened was I fell in love. The moment that that drug hit my lips and went into my lungs, I felt like it had the power to resolve all of my problems. It made me feel complete. It was attractive in the way that it tasted. I loved the effect of it. And from the moment that I tried it the first time, I knew that I would spend, I didn't know how long chasing that high.
And that high caused problems itself because that led you to
Mm.
being raped by drug dealers because when you're in that high, you're not even sure of your surroundings anymore. What impact did this have on you when you were raped by the drug dealers?
Yeah, so that was kind of a different experience, and that wasn't surrounding crack cocaine. Although crack cocaine helped me to compromise my integrity for a long period of time. At the age of 16, I was raped by a man that sold drugs to my mom. It was a methamphetamine dealer, and he had come up into a room that I was in at a friend's house, and he forced me to give him oral sex and then to have intercourse with him. And then a couple of days later, one of my friends pulled up. And this was a very scary guy. He was very violent. He was known for kidnapping people, beating people, handcuffing people, and people not returning back to where they took them from. I was well aware of this. He had done this to my brother a number of years prior. So I wasn't really keen on talking about what had happened, but a friend of mine pulled up on me in her car and told me that she knew what happened. At that point, I became extremely terrified. And about, I don't know, 3 or 4 days later, I was kidnapped out of a house. And this group of people that he was with beat me for more than 8 hours. They cut my hair off. They spray painted me black, handcuffed me to the outside of a car, and just did a whole bunch of terrible things to me. And this is all because of the relationship with the drug environment. Unfortunately, I didn't have much else to fall back on. That it was my entire life. I was raised by a mom that was immersed in that kind of lifestyle, and everyone I knew, by the time I was 16 years old, everyone I knew participated in that lifestyle in one way or another, aside from my grandmother. But my grandmother also lived in a neighborhood where so many of these people knew where she was. So shortly after being kidnapped and beaten by the guy that did this so that I wouldn't tell, because of course, after being kidnapped, I did talk to the police. The police never prosecuted them. Then a group of people, in order to try to get me to not talk to the police and testify against them, tried to burn my grandmother's house down. They dumped gasoline underneath the sun porch and lit the house on fire one night when I wasn't there, which is exactly what I was fearful of, which is why I didn't want to say anything in the first place. And what happened for me after that experience was I realized that people like me, the system doesn't help people like me. The police don't help people like me. When a person like me is raped and beaten, they don't prosecute the people that do it. And we're left to our own, environment. And that's when my drug use really spiraled out of control. I was afraid to sleep. I felt like I needed to carry weapons to protect myself. And my mom turned her back on me during that time. And I'm going to tell you that was when I attempted suicide not long after that, because I just didn't know how to navigate that life. And I felt extremely hopeless.
Yeah, because that's one of the things I saw that you attempted suicide because obviously everything going so wrong. You must think to yourself, what is going on? Why am I in this world? Who is there to help me? And one thing you did mention, which is quite critical, is that when you are a person in a less privileged position because of your circumstances that surrounds you, no one takes you serious when you go to the authority to report to anything. They look at you and think you're the problem. You
Mhm.
must have been the problem. Look at you. Look at you're on drugs. You're on this, but no one sits you down and say, why did you get yourself into this circumstance, and how can we get you out of it and make your life better? When you were thinking of committing suicide, what was going through your mind, and how did you navigate it out that you said to yourself, no, I need to stick in this world, I need to be here? How did you change your mind?
Well, it took a long time for me to get to a place where I felt like I wanted to stick around. When I attempted suicide, I had just turned 17 years old and I was heavily intoxicated. Again, I was trying to not sleep. Sleep wasn't safe. Everybody knew where to find me. Um, I threw myself in front of a moving car, hoping that I would get hit. The car turned out to be a police officer and took me to a psychiatric ward. The psychiatric ward then put me in a treatment facility, and they released me to my mother's house, who was a drug dealer. So, the day I got out of treatment, I ended up under the influence of drugs again. And so, and that process consistently happened for a number of decades. It wasn't until the age of 40 that I realized that I needed to be in this world. For a long time, I had children. Not long after that, my son's dad was shot and killed when I was 5 months pregnant. The man that I married after that, I had my oldest daughter with. He ended up getting a life without sentence. That was an abusive relationship. My life spiraled out of control with even more drug use and abuse and criminal behavior. He taught me how to be a criminal. I was a failure. I had this idea that I would be a better mom than my mom was, but I didn't have a skill set. I had failed my children. I started to become incarcerated. And, at every turn, I just felt like a failure. I had a picture of who I wanted to be when I was young. And that is not what my life looked like at all. And at the age of 40, which, mind you, I had had a couple of periods of recovery that followed prison sentences. But of course, I ended up relapsing a number of times. And then at the age of 40, I was arrested for the last time. And I was really grateful that I had attempted suicide not long before I was arrested the last time, because I was married to a guy that was terrorizing my life. And I tried to take hundreds of pills that they were psychotropic medications. Because he was coming after me with a hammer. And I wasn't going to let him own my death. I wanted to own that myself. I woke up about 4 days later with an inability to even speak, because I had done some damage with the pills. And, not long after that, I was arrested, and it dawned on me that I wasn't going to die, not easily anyway. And so I realized that it was time to start living. And it was probably a good 6 months after my release. I ended up locked up for about 6 months. I was facing my fourth prison sentence. And I was associated with a nonprofit program prior to that relapse that was supporting me to go back to school. And they helped me retain an attorney. And I ended up getting released to a drug court program in Seattle, Washington. And as I progressed each day in jail, I recognized that I was feeding myself a message that somebody else or other people had given me. And it, resulted in self-hatred. And I knew that in order for me to succeed, I was going to have to change that message. And that's when I stopped wanting to die. And I realized I needed to live. And so I put a lot of effort into that.
Yeah, because honestly, and anyone who looks at your life, who reads your life story, will be truly amazed. At the age of 23, you had 2 children, and you were in an abusive relationship, and you had to develop, you had the heroin habits, and you just said now your the father for your child was shot at when you were pregnant 5 months old, and you were addicted so badly that you robbed a Mexican drug dealer.
Yeah.
And I thought, what at gunpoint? What was going through your mind that when you desperate yourself at that time for drugs, that you wanted to do this, or what? Can you remember those days?
Oh, yeah.
You were coming to your change, because your change is totally phenomenal. But what was going to your mind that you wanted to steal a car, or you did steal a car at gunpoint? Because that's phenomenal. No one will believe that's you. So what happened? What was going through your mind? Were you desperate for something?
Well, sure. And like I said, my first husband taught me how to be a criminal. So did my mom. And
Mm.
heroin is a highly addictive drug. You become physically dependent on heroin. And if you don't have it, you become very ill. So I was incentivized to do what I had to do for my addiction. Um, I liked a lot of money and a lot of drugs. And so there were certain things that other people did that just weren't advantageous, in my opinion. I really like to economize my time, which means that I have to go for the big stuff. And so, um, I met a guy that was a robber, and I happened to have a gun, and we connected, and we started robbing Mexicans downtown. We knew that there was a small likelihood that they were going to call the cops because a lot of them were in the country illegally, and the majority of them sold quantities of heroin and cocaine. So it was an advantageous opportunity. And when it came to cars, the same thing. I learned that I could support myself and my addiction by stealing cars. I preferred to steal cars that were running, so I didn't have to put a whole lot of effort into the work. But there were times where I had to break ignitions and things like that. But that was a way for me to take care of myself. And that's the thing. I had 5 brothers, and I learned early on that if I wanted to participate in certain things, I had to figure it out on my own. And there were things that other women did in addiction that I just really wasn't willing to do. I wasn't willing to compromise my integrity by selling myself. Um, you know, for a number of reasons. I didn't like it when people forced themselves on me and took those intimate parts of me. And I certainly wasn't willing to give those things away. So I was more willing to commit crimes and, take care of my own needs as opposed to being in somebody's pocket or, being responsible to pay them back for something. I just didn't want to do that. So I did what I had to do to take care of Ginny.
And Ginny, um, according to Yahoo News, ranked 17 serious conviction and was sent to jail 3 times. And in all that time, when you were in jail, something magical happened. Something happened because you said prison gave you a chance to clean yourself up.
Yeah.
But when you were released, it wasn't long before you went back on the drug. So even though you were in prison, you found this healing process in prison. What was it that prison, why did you feel safe and relaxed in the
Yeah.
type of place where you found the environment more homely in prison? Why did you feel that?
That's a really good question. And as you were giving that narrative, I was thinking about I'm writing a book, and I was thinking about where I'm at in the book, and so I'm having this intimate recall with some of my past experience. And when I went to prison, the first thing that happened for me is I was able to rest. I didn't have to worry about somebody raping me. I didn't have to worry about somebody taking everything that I had. So it was an opportunity for me to go to sleep. I hadn't done that in a really long time. So that was the first thing. But it also allowed me to separate myself from the destructive environment. I didn't have drugs surrounding me constantly. I didn't have this environment where I wasn't safe and where I had to essentially become a part of that environment in order to keep myself safe. So, it gave me a separation. What prison didn't provide me is it did not provide me an opportunity to recreate patterns. Because I wasn't sentenced to drug charges, I was sentenced to other things associated with drugs. I wasn't required to go to treatment. Because there were policies put in place that had the prison system essentially take education out of the prisons. I was limited to what kind of education I could actually participate in. I grew up in an environment where I was living in desperation and, you know, for most of my life. And so I didn't really gain the foundational knowledge necessary to help me be successful when I came out of that environment. So I had a high resolve. I had high hopes and I had a plan, but I didn't know, nobody taught me how to navigate that plan while I was in prison. So the seeds didn't take root. And that is what I think really was the problem and why I didn't have a longer lasting separation once I was released.
I love you finally got a wake up call one day.
Mhm.
And this wake up call, I mean, I want to know, where did you get this wake up call? Can you remember what really happened that gave you this wake up call? And in getting this wake up call, you navigated your life into studying. Where did
Yeah.
this happen and how did that happen all inspire?
Yeah. So, first of all, if I take it back to the initial prompting when I was very young in 1978, and I didn't actually want to use drugs. I did, or I think it was 1979 actually. I didn't want to use drugs, but I did it. But I knew that it was contrary to what my spirit said I was supposed to be doing. So there were a number of those incidents. And, even with my prison terms and my juvenile correction terms, um, I wished that I could be living a different life. I just didn't know how to. So when I relapsed in, I think it was 2011, because I had gotten out of prison the third time in 2010. And in 2011, I relapsed again. And I went to see my mom. I was married to this guy, and the relationship was a domestic violence relationship, but I didn't want to be using. I knew before, when I went to prison, that I needed to end my relationship with drugs because it was only destroying my life. So when I picked up, I didn't actually want to be using it. Just seemed like a better decision than living in the chaos that I was living in. And then once I started, I couldn't stop. So I was existing in this period of time of relapse where my life was chaotic. I didn't want to be living it, but I couldn't stop myself because the drugs had taken over all of my senses. And so I had such an intimate relationship with addiction ever since I was a small child. The moment that something that changes my chemical makeup internally, it overrides everything, my logic and everything. So when I was finally arrested, even though my addiction did not want me to be arrested, but my spirit wanted me to be arrested. When I was arrested, I knew that was my opportunity to start living. And I had taken myself through all of these processes, my incarcerations, all of the traumas that I experienced. And so when I was sitting in the back of that cop car and I knew it was over, I knew that guy couldn't touch me anymore. I knew I didn't have to pick up drugs again. I knew it was going to be a process, but I knew it was time to start living. And that's what I did. So it didn't matter what it took. It didn't matter that I didn't have the knowledge. I was going to figure it out. And that's what I've done every day since then.
Jenny, I have to ask you because I mean, you were released from prison. Normally, when people get released from prison, then you're going back to that route. How did you go back when you were released from prison and you've had this beautiful, for you, it was wonderful inside the prison. But when you came out the final time, when you knew you were ready, what did you do differently to navigate yourself, to avoid the addiction pain again, to avoid falling back into that temptation again? What did you do differently?
The first thing I did was I made a commitment to myself not to use drugs, that it didn't matter. I had done a whole lot of praying and meditating, a whole lot of reading, a whole lot of spiritual work, a whole lot of recovery work when I was in there. And I actually got on my knees and I prayed and I was like, okay, God, you have got to show me what I'm not doing right when I am trying to be in recovery. How do I stay clean? And in this like period of meditation, what was revealed to me was if you do not put drugs in your body, you will not get loaded. And it was like an epiphany. It was so simple and it struck me like a ton of bricks. And so I made that my number one commitment, that I would not put drugs in my body no matter what.
Mm.
And then I committed to doing that one day at a time. And then I tried to bring in these other things to help me reconstruct my life, to build a foundation that allowed me to become this person that I am in my heart. And I really didn't know that it was possible for her to exist. But 9 years, 3 months, and 4 days later, I'll tell you that she is a very, very different person than the one that was existing in the world. But I mean, that was it. I just made the decision not to use one day at a time. And as I stuck with that, my life has evolved tremendously. And so I participate in 12-step programs. I'm actually a member of Narcotics Anonymous, and I practice the principles of the 12 steps. I carry other people, I don't carry, excuse me, let me rephrase that. I take other people through the steps. I give back what was freely given to me. And that has proven to help me not forget where I come from and to continue to move forward in that recovery.
That's truly amazing. And so, how did you stay grounded? Because now you read a lot, and you enrolled yourself into University of Washington, and you excelled at it. How did you decide to go ahead and say, "This is what I'm going for, and I'm
Yeah.
going to stick with it"? And how did that impact your children as well?
Yeah, so it was a traumatic event. The man that I'm married to relapsed on drugs, and I became a victim of his crime. I prosecuted him, but I also helped him. And I recognized as the victim, after being beaten in my home, that he was going to go into prison and come out the same guy if there was no intervention. And I had to take a look at who's creating the policies for folks like him and myself. And what I realized was that it's not people like me. So, how can somebody that doesn't know what it's like to be me create policies on how I should be treated, rehabilitated, or live my life? It seems to me they wouldn't have really any basis for their policy creation. And so I knew that it was necessary for me to go to school. At the time, I was working in social services. I didn't know if I was going to be able to keep doing that, but I made a decision, just like in everything else. It's like, yes, I can. I made the decision to keep moving forward. I kept supervising the programs. I went back to school. I started to do really well, and I fell in love with education. The more I went to school and attended classes, the more confident I became in myself. And what I did was, I guess that information sort of translated to my children because they watched me make the decision to do this and stick with it. That doesn't mean that they're in agreement with all of my decisions. But I ended up, I was being recruited by Ivy League schools such as Yale and Cornell, which was really impressive for me. I then started to apply for scholarships, and I made the decision to go to the University of Washington. I got a pretty great scholarship to cover my entire undergraduate education while I was on campus. And then I applied for a graduate degree scholarship, the Truman Scholarship, which I didn't understand the depth of the prestige that is carried with that scholarship. And I became the Washington State Truman Scholar for 2020. When I got that scholarship, I started to really think that maybe I've been wrong about myself. At first, I thought they were wrong about who they chose, but when they informed me that they knew exactly who they chose, I thought to myself, gosh, maybe I don't have a really clear view of who I am. And I think that has helped my kids to really just see me stick with things, which helps them to stick with things. Yeah, and with all of that, I feel really compelled not just to help my husband, but to help other people that are incarcerated and other people that are caught in these cycles of system dependence. And I feel extremely passionate about that now. And, finishing my undergraduate degree and getting ready to go to graduate school last fall, which I ended up deferring because I accepted a job in San Diego. It really kind of helped me to see how important my life experience is in connection with my education, which was the intention behind my education initially. I said, oh, I have all this experience. If I put some letters behind my name, that's going to carry a lot more weight, and I'll be able to help a lot more people.
And you are, because so honestly, this is truly an amazing story from addiction pain to university, most people never think in their life that once they get on that path, there will be a recovery phase for them. Do you ever get in your mind at times where you feel, especially when things are not going your way, things are slightly harder than you expect? The pandemic, as we both know, has hit so many people in different ways. And our path and the life we've all thought or created has not been, not normally gone according to plan. Do you ever get that part in my, thoughts in your mind where you feel, I want to go back? This life was actually slightly easier, but this new world, and how do you stay consistent in your new world?
Yeah, that is a really fantastic question. I'm always impressed when people pull out really in-depth questions that are super aligned with my experience. I've had imposter syndrome the entire time that I've been doing this. But specifically yesterday, I'm dealing with a lot of challenges right now. Things are definitely not linear. My success has felt like it was on a slip and slide with baby oil for a while, where I was just going to slide right into changing the whole entire world. But a brick wall has been thrown in my path. And so now I get the opportunity to figure out how to go around the left or the right, or maybe build a ladder and climb over it. Those kind of things can feel very daunting at times. And challenges with being a parent, challenges with being married, challenges with just trying to navigate life in a different way than I ever have, cause me to say those kind of things, specifically like, oh my gosh, this is really hard and I don't want to do this anymore. Yesterday in particular, I was driving down the street and there was a car that I saw next to me, and it was a car, a 280Z. Back in the 90s and 80s, those cars were super cool. And there was an experience where I'd stolen one. And when I looked over at this car yesterday, it triggered me, and it brought me right back to this time where I had stolen a car and I was using drugs. And it was a time where I was free. I was young. I had no responsibilities, even though there was a prison sentence that resulted at the end of that car. My brain only took me to this very euphoric memory and then what my brain said to me was, you can take care of all of these hard things right now if you go use. And you will not have to worry about any of these things because it'll all end right now. And that felt very attractive to me in that moment. And what I get the opportunity to do when I have those feelings, and I try not to impose these ideas or opinions on myself that it's not okay to have those thoughts or feelings, because I used drugs for a really long time. And if I were to just step away and never have a thought about that again, I think that might be a little bit bizarre. That would be like living in the same house for 30 years and not ever reflecting back on what the layout of the house was, or where the kitchen was, or, what have you. And so, so what I did is I called someone. I called somebody in recovery and I talked to her and I said, hey, this is the thought and the feeling that I just had. These are the things that were going through my mind. I know this is a terrible idea, but sometimes they feel really powerful to me, because my brain wants to go back to this time where I didn't have to face all of these challenges. Because who likes to do hard things?
No.
No one? No one. Right.
Yeah.
And so there are things that happen. And then after that, I went to my home group and I got the opportunity to share about it in a meeting, because when I share about those kind of thoughts and feelings out loud, it takes a lot of the power out of it for me. And so that's how I maintain consistency. I just follow this, specific set of principles. I wake up in the morning, I read some spiritual stuff, I pray, I meditate, I write a gratitude list, I journal, I write a little bit in my story. I then go work out, whether it be run or work out at the gym or what have you. And then, I start my day. And when I'm triggered, I call somebody, I talk to somebody about it, I share about it at a meeting. But I have things that I do that I do to take care of myself, because what I don't want to do is I don't want to take that one moment and put myself in the wrong environment. I don't want to forget what it was like for me the day before I got arrested, because if I forget what that was like, there's a high likelihood that I could fall right back into that familiar pattern, because that's what we do as human beings. We function in patterns. And when you have a 30-year rut in the dirt next to you, and and your bike tire wants to slide over to the left, you have to be really aware how to keep it to the right. And so until I have this rut created over to the right, I'm just going to stay really diligent and practice those things that started out being really uncomfortable, but now they make sense to me.
You're absolutely right, because it's so interesting. So many people, we always forget that pain because we don't want to think about it. We it gives us bad memories. But sometimes when things really don't really go our way, we forget that, and it's so easy to forget. But it's always nice to have that crucial reminder of that thing that it caused, that damage that it caused. I always say to people, always remember the one thing that you remember so clearly that you do not want to go back there again. You say to yourself, I do not want to go. I do not want to be there. And once you remember that, that sets you up apart for life. That
Yeah.
this is where I want to be. And I think you're clearly doing well. When you speak, because you do lots of speaking engagements, you've been doing lots of, I've seen your work. When you speak to people, what advice would you give to anyone who's going through this addiction pain right now on getting out and trying to get out and find their joy again?
Yeah, and that's a really good question as well. One thing that I want people to know is that it doesn't get better. Anytime we try to outthink our addiction, we just end up spiraling even deeper into it. Um, if you can, just stop. Stop just for today.
Mm.
That's what's necessary in order for us to get our footing. I think often we don't like our circumstances, and the only way that we can change our circumstances is to stop and then to ask for help. I uh, I am a supporter of incarceration because for me, I personally had to be incarcerated so that there was a forced separation because the drugs tend to take over my brain and my logical thinking for a period of time. It's kind of like a demon existing inside of you and doing your thinking for you, and it takes a while to get that beast to be quiet. And so if you can lock yourself away somewhere where you don't have access, I think that's always ideal. Um, and I get a lot of emails and messages from folks who have family members that are struggling with addiction, and everybody wants the magical answer that's going to save their life, and there isn't one. There isn't one. If you're an addict, you have to stop. First, you have to stop today. I suggest you go to a 12-step meeting because you're going to find a whole lot of people that are there that have went through what you went through. And there's something to be said about people being able to model to you that it is possible. And if you're a family member, go to a Nar-Anon, an Al-Anon, or some kind of meeting where you have family members that have kids or husbands or wives or friends that are in addiction, and get some support there, because you cannot save your family member. You can be there to support them, but you can't save them. And often what we do is we enable folks, we make it easy. And then when they die, we hold ourselves responsible. If we just stop the support of the destructive behavior and we force our loved ones to experience consequences, there's a higher likelihood that we're going to have them back a little bit faster. But again, there are no guarantees. Um, but in order to do anything different, you have to stop right now.
Addiction pain to graduate. I really can't believe your story. It's really phenomenal. When you're, have you been back to your mom and have you had this conversation? Has she seen your new you? And what goes through her mind when she sees you the way you are today?
My mom passed away in 2011, and my dad passed away in 2017. My mom has seen me a couple of times in recovery.
Mm.
Um, I think that back in the past, when she saw me in recovery the first time, I still blamed my mom a lot. So there was a lot of contention in our relationship, and I wielded out a lot of requirements in order for us to engage. I was present with her during the time that she died. We had a very enabling relationship. Um, I often wish that my mom could see the progress that I'm making now. But I think that her death was a huge part of what has helped me to change my life. I definitely used and spiraled out of control after her death because even though we had a very tumultuous relationship, we were very enmeshed in a lot of ways. And so I did spiral out of control after her death. But I really believe that today, that because of her death and the things that I experienced, I got the opportunity to recognize a lot of things that I missed, a lot of ways I wish I could have accepted her differently then. That we as parents do the best we can with what we have, and I really realized, which it makes me sad that I realized it so late. Um, that I really think that she tried. I think she tried with the best of her ability to be a parent, but I think that she was just really lacking. And I just think with what I know today, our relationship could have been very different.
Ginny, before I let you go, I have to ask you about the system. You said the system is almost designed to fail people like yourself. What can the system do differently to help people now? Because there's so many people are out there who are going through this difficult pain. But like you said, they go report things to the system just looks at them and think they are the problem. What can the system do differently to change and incorporate people who are seeking this help?
Yeah, I think the first thing that is necessary with all the systems, especially in the US, is that we start bringing people with lived experience into the policy making circle. I think that's really necessary because, the reality I had on a university campus was that I was in class with a whole lot of really intelligent young people that came from very privileged and affluent backgrounds. And those are the same people that are running our country today. And they all come in with the best of intentions, and they're all fighting the man when they're in their 20s, and then they become the man when they're in their 50s and 60s, and then they're the ones writing policy for people like me. So there's a huge disconnect there. I also think that when a person enters into a system, whether it be the homeless industrial complex, social services, our social welfare system, our prison system, our jail system, that we need to perform an in-depth needs assessment, and we need to start applying services where the needs are. I think that we also need to teach people to be accountable for themselves. And, because, like, for example, if you take my life and my six brothers and sisters, we weren't taught the necessary foundational things that were, that we've consented to as a society, to, utilize, like, these constructs to live well, to not victimize other people. So when you don't learn how to do those things, you don't usually magically figure them out on your own. And I've had to sort of piecemeal that kind of experience together for myself in my 40s. And so I think that it's that we have the bandwidth, we have the capacity, and we have the technology to implement this kind of structure into all of our services and all of our institutions so that we can help people to be independent, so that we can help them to care for themselves and have that be sustainable.
Oh, Jeannie, this is phenomenal. I really applaud your extraordinary life. You've really changed, addiction. You've made people who are out there trying their best, thinking this can't be done. I think anyone who will listen to your conversation knows it can be done, but it's just one day at a time, and believe in yourself. Think about that thing that makes you not want to go back to that pain anymore. Thank you so much for sharing the story. Any final words before I let you go?
I'm just very grateful for the conversation, and I really appreciate your questions and my time with you today. And I'm really excited to be able to share this podcast because I think we covered a lot of really necessary stuff that helped to flesh it all out, from the mess to the change to the message and the supports that could have been in place to what we can do to restructure our support network now. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on as well because your story is really phenomenal. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sam.